Is that the time already? It must be time for Raconteurs News. I must get my computer on.
Welcome to Raconteurs News.
And good evening, and welcome to this Friday edition of Raconteurs News, broadcasting live from raconteursnews.com, and also you can find us on Spreaker as well. Just do a search Raconteurs News, and you should be able to find us. And we are beginning to grow as well, because right after us, we will be having our first show on Spreaker, on the Raconteurs News platform for Unique Lee. He'll be joining us. He'll be coming on and doing his, not joining us, he'll be having his own show from 10 o'clock tonight. Right after us, myself and Andy. Andy Young is joining us. As usual, Andy, how are you doing?
I'm doing brilliant, mate. It's been a bit of an interesting day. We didn't find out Lee was joining us till I turned my computer on this morning, so we've been flying around trying to get him organised, and I think we're nearly there, so...
Oh, well, that's great. I mean, expansion is the name of the game. Probably not quite as early as this we anticipated, but yeah, Uniquely is going to be a great addition to our little station, our little engine that's going on here. Anyway, tonight we have welcoming back for our March update. It's our financial insider, Paul. How are you doing, Paul?
Good evening, gents. I'm very well, and yourself?
Good evening, Paul.
I think we're all good.
I'm very well as well, thank you.
Jolly good.
So, interesting to know.
Like to start?
Well, where would we like to start? You're the man with the information. Start wherever you want, Paul.
Okay, I think one thing we can start off is to do with Syria. I mean, we often get a lot of comments, well, I'm not really seeing anything happening that makes me have any confidence that the world's changing, and we're seeing the end of the Cabal, so to speak. Well, obviously since we were last on, we've certainly seen some big developments. I mean, obviously, initially people were saying, oh, hang on, there's a ceasefire that's been issued in Syria, and everyone was going, oh, hang on, that doesn't really work in Russia's favour. That kind of sounds like the Cabal are winning it. Well, obviously, when we look at the kind of fine detail of that, we realise that's anything but the case, because the ceasefire effectively was to ensure that all the rebel forces, all the sort of supposed kind of ISIS, Daesh and other terrorist organisations were supposed to be part of the ceasefire. Well, obviously, they're not going to be, but that's who was supposed to be covered by this. And okay, arguably, yes, of course, the Syrian army and their supporters have to do likewise. And people think, well, okay, that weakens Assad. Well, it doesn't, because what it basically did was allow Russia then to have a clean slate to act within Syria, to continue removing ISIS, Daesh and all the other terrorist organisations notionally unopposed. And we have seen some breaks in the ceasefire, but what was interesting was there were some shelling in northern Syria, and the Americans do have an operational base, and the Russians contacted them regarding this matter, and the Americans assisted and cooperated and dealt with the problem, and that's kind of shown a big shift. We've now got essentially Russia completely in control of Syria. Yes, there are isolated incidences of terrorist attacks, and obviously, yes, ISIS, Daesh, etc. will carry on doing what they're doing. But what we have seen now is that the US are cooperating, and all that kind of jingoistic threats that were coming from Turkey and Saudi Arabia to get involved. Well, we've seen, as we discussed last time, we said it wouldn't happen, and it hasn't happened because clearly they're in no position to do so. They have no support from America or NATO to undertake such activity, and Turkey, being a member of NATO, it didn't comply and was to defy NATO. It would put them in an extremely awkward situation. So clearly they were unable to do so. We're not to suggest they're not attempting to still arm ISIS, still probably trying to get cheap oil, as we know, but they're very much being cut off from doing this now. And Saudi Arabia has gone back in its little box and decided not to do anything in Syria at all because it realises it would be a suicide mission to do so. And Russia would have no hesitation in eradicating them very, very quickly.
I did notice that recently that the propaganda machine seemed to be kicking in, and it seemed to be a sort of a half-hearted attempt to try and demonise Russia, because they started saying that these were hospitals and things that had been destroyed by Russian bombing, which, you know, is whether you can prove that or not. But it did seem to be a half-hearted propaganda campaign. What do you think that that America has now realised that it's the Syrian game, as it were, is just about over?
Yes, I think very much so. Yeah, you're right. There were sort of half-hearted attempts. I mean, we heard, I think it was some Israeli defence minister accusing Syria of breaking the ceasefire using chemical weapons. I mean, it's utterly farcical. I mean, it's so ridiculous. I mean, it kind of destroys the point of even making it. If you're trying to create propaganda, you should at least have the intelligence to do so in a way that might be believable. But yeah, for sure, the propaganda war's over, and really, this is the death of the Cabal in the Middle East. They tried to redraw the map, as we know, and Syria was a big part of that. And I mean, of course, we have to go back to the backstory of why Syria ever happened. It wasn't because Assad was this nasty, horrible dictator. It was because he wouldn't play ball with the West and allow gas pipelines to be put through his land, so they decided to declare war on him. And also because Syria has huge gas and oil fields offshore. That's the real story. That's what they want. They want your asset. If you won't comply, then they'll remove you. And that's really what this is all about. So people have to get over the propaganda that Assad is this nasty dictator. And of course, what's interesting is, once the ceasefire was announced, I understand that Assad's called for elections in April. And if Syrian people want to re-elect him again, that's their choice and theirs alone to make. It's not for any of us to interfere as to whether we think he should be a leader or not. If he's democratically elected, he's democratically elected. That's just the way it is. But I do think that's a big sea change in the Middle East. And yeah, okay, Israel's come out and made this farcical statement, but in reality, Israel's very much keeping its head down because it also knows from meetings it had with Putin that it's simply not going to be allowed to try and flex its muscles and create any conflict. And this is why it's equally just basically persona non grata. And given what it's done previously in that region, it is very much an interesting climb down from their perspective.
So if the Cabal are, as you say, sort of finished in the Middle East, what implications does that have for Israel?
Well, it's like all these nations, they're going. I mean, Israel, yeah, it's very, very difficult for them. It's hard to know precisely what's going on. There is a lot of dissent within the nation now against Netanyahu. I think people are realising that he's not in their best interest. What's the future? Well, from what I understand, at some point, yes, the whole Palestine question is going to rear its head, but it will be dealt with. Quite how that happens and what the ramifications are at this stage, no one's exactly sure. In terms of their support, well, when the world changes, nations are going to have to change, and Israel will be no different. And I, no doubt, think it will better represent its own people, because, once again, it's very easy to blame the people of nations and demonise them. It's the same with the US. This has got nothing to do with the US people, what goes on in Washington, and equally, whatever Netanyahu's doing or not doing, it is no reflection on the people of Israel. yes, it's always very good to blame isolated instances of how people react. And yes, there has been some regrettable actions from people in Israel, but equally there's been regrettable actions from lunatic fringes in the US but they don't represent the views of the average person, and that's the important thing. But for sure, Israel will figure prominently in major changes, as will the whole of the Middle East. I mean, if we look at Saudi Arabia, so before the House of Saud will fall, that's inevitable. It's not a question of if, it's when. I think we will see Turkey certainly broken up into regions. The Kurds will probably end up with their own nation. Not quite how, obviously, the Cabal wanted it to be. But the map of the Middle East won't be redrawn as they wanted. It'll be quite the reverse. And, of course, we've seen nations such as Egypt, which are now fully cooperating with Russia and China, and they have very strong relationships, and they kicked out Cabal effectively through the Muslim Brotherhood. And they're now starting to enjoy and reap the benefits of having this relationship, which flies completely in the face of what the Cabal wanted. Libya is going to be a very difficult issue still. It has huge civil war problems. Iraq, similar, but I think in the course of time we will see Iraq dealt with, we'll see Afghanistan dealt with. But it certainly appears as though quite a bit of the drugs money that obviously is being financed for the Cabal is not happening anymore, so there's been a squeeze on that, which is obviously a huge development as well.
We've got a question posed in the chat room already for you, Paul, and it's from Ken, and he's asking, what about Greater Israel?
I don't know what he means by Greater Israel. Perhaps he might be able to qualify that question.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, sorry about that.
I think he's. I think he's referring to the idea that Israel is looking to completely take over the complete.
Okay. Well, that's exactly what we were just saying. The Cabal plan was to redraw the map of the Middle East and Israel to sprawl out through Syria and beyond. Well, that absolutely is never going to happen. This is what the whole Syrian war was about, and why. Timing's everything, and people will say, well, why didn't Russia get involved 2-3 years ago in Syria? They were obviously an ally of Assad. Yes, that's true. But the reason they got involved late last year was because it became apparent to them that was precisely what the move was in Syria, and they went, right, well, enough's enough. We're taking action, and we're going to remove ISIS, Daesh, and every other terrorist organisation. We're going to deal with Turkey's involvement in the process. And, yeah, so no, in that sense, no, absolutely, it will never happen.
So you think that the as things stand at the moment, that the Israeli, the Greater Israel idea is dead in the water. I'd just like to take you back, just when you said that Syria, you were talking about a pipeline, that's the real reason that they went in there, because Syria were refusing to allow a pipeline. Now, isn't that the same MO as Afghanistan, just before 9/11?
Yes, exactly, because what happened there was, as everyone knows, I mean, we're not defending the actions of the Taliban and what they've done in Afghanistan, far from it, but they were cutting the opium supply massively. And there's an interesting statistic, I can't remember exactly, but if you look back prior to around 2001, early on, the US was economically suffering greatly. And all of a sudden, post 9/11, there was this massive jump in the relative economic statistics for the US. And no doubt, I would say it relates to the fact that the opium trade started to flow again because of, as you say, the war in Afghanistan. So, yes, there's always reasons. And of course, as everybody knows, the drugs industry or the drugs cartels has been hugely profitable for the Cabal. And a very important aspect of why they've been able to fund operations all over the world in proxy wars and with organisations such as ISIS, which everyone knows they fund, train, arm, etc., etc.
Yeah. Where do you see it going? I mean, we're in quite a transient period. So, as far as you're concerned, the Cabal is coming down, and do you think that they're trying to? Do you think they're trying to have some sort of exit strategy, the Cabal, Do you think they're going to try and implement an exit strategy, or do you think that people are just going to finally wake up to what's going off, what's happening, and they're just going to be dismantled and destroyed?
Well, I mean, you could arguably say there's always this thing where you kind of think they could go for a scorched earth policy on their way out. But what we've seen in Syria is it's not. I mean, it's an exit strategy in a sense, but the Cabal's getting weaker and weaker and weaker, and their ability to influence world events is dwindling. And as we've seen in the Middle East, as we've seen in Ukraine, we can talk a little bit about what's been going on there in the recent weeks shortly. And we're seeing this curtailing of their influence around the world. We're seeing nations now signing trade agreements. I mean, every day of every week we're seeing nations in North Africa. We've got Algeria recently with Russia and China. We're seeing all the trade agreements with Egypt. We're seeing trade agreements in European nations. I mean, if you even look at, apart from the US, every nation is now either signing trade agreements with Russia, not so much a lot of European nations, but certainly with China. They're signing all these currency swaps. They've joined the AIIB. There's talk of a lot of foreign banks joining the new alternative to SWIFT, which is the SIPs in China. So, yeah, their influence is weakening. And I've heard comments recently, and people have been saying to me, oh, well, the markets are all being propped up. Nothing's wrong. It's just business as usual. Well, the economic reality is every day of every week we're seeing economic news which just proves categorically that the world's financial system is grinding to a halt. I mean, today we had the US weekly earnings drop the most on record. The markets got pumped up ridiculously high. They then obviously started to fall back. We saw gold and silver smashed and then the price recover. And then obviously go higher and they've sort of leveled back. But these market machinations, they are absolutely the Cabal doing this. It is nobody else. It is in absolutely no one else's interest. We can call them good guys, whoever you want to call them, to pump these markets up, because all they're doing is inflating the bubble even bigger. And when that bubble bursts, the blowback is going to be even bigger. So why would the good guys or the nations who are seeking to change the world risk an even bigger blowback when that bubble bursts? It makes absolutely no sense. And in terms of gold and silver, and particularly gold, the only nation that stands to suppress the price is the US, because it wants to keep its notional dollar strong. So notionally, yes, they can do that with the price. We've seen the dollar rise and rise and rise against other currencies, but it's all a big facade, because we've seen in the last year or more over $1 trillion US treasuries dumped by nations. The dumping carries on and on and on. There is no confidence in the dollar, so they can prop these markets up, do whatever they like. It's just an illusion. The economic reality is biting every day. We're seeing endless retail stores across, particularly in the US, they're all closing. We're going to start seeing it bite all over the world, and we already are beginning to see that. So it doesn't really matter what they do with the markets, but the idea that anyone from the good guy side of the fence, so to speak, would be pumping markets makes absolutely no sense. There's no reason. China is just waiting for the West or the Cabal to implode. They're not in any mood to start interfering in the markets, because it's not in their interest. And also from a propaganda perspective, the last thing they need is to be accused of meddling in Western markets and trying to manipulate, whether it's indices, whether it's currencies or etc. They just won't do that.
Excellent. We've got another comment there from Ken in the chat room. He says, but won't they be replaced with another Cabal with a slightly different hue?
Well, I mean, this comes back to the whole point. No, let's be absolutely clear about this. The Cabal, as they exist, will be destroyed in their entirety. That means all their financial systems will go, including all the banks. The big pharmaceutical industries will grow, their drug cartels will go. Everything that's ever made them any money is being dismantled and taken down. And the whole point is, the new world that comes about is not about the Cabal. I mean, I'm getting people coming back to me again going, oh, Putin's Putin's a bad guy. Putin's, he represents the cabal. Well, okay, the only question I would have for people who say that to me is, tell me exactly what Putin's done in recent times that has been of any benefit to the cabal. And the answer is nothing. What has Putin done that has been detrimental to the cabal? Well, the list is endless, as has China. So the idea, they're going to floor all the cabal and allow, they're going to become the new cabal and the old cabal are going to sneak through the back door, is just nonsense. It just fits a narrative that people don't want to believe, that it's possible to see the end of the cabal. Well, you are going to see the end of it in their entirety, and you will see a world born that will bear no resemblance to the one you see now. And this is part of the kind of ongoing discussion, that it might be a good point to start to bring this in. There has been in recent weeks a number of very high-level discussions amongst nations, and obviously the US was part of that. And the US were essentially told, well, in this new world, we're going to have gold-backed currencies. That effectively, this reset is not a reset in currency. The reset is a return to the gold standard across the world. So those nations who have large gold or huge, enormous gold reserves, like Russia, China, will be not dominant currencies, but they will be strong currencies. So, for example, the yuan is likely, and I'll phrase this, I'm speculating here. This is where I get into the realms of speculation. But I think there's some substance, but this isn't concrete fact. I think we will see nations adopt the yuan in the Far East. You may even see Australia adopt it, I don't know. You'll see nations in probably the former Soviet republics, as they were, will adopt the ruble. You may even see some Eastern European nations adopt the ruble. The European Union and the euro is dead and buried, but you will see, and we spoke about this, I think, on the very first show, Andy, where I said that Austria, Germany, Holland, and Finland at that point were discussing some gold-backed currency. There was rumours it would be called a Nordic euro, but just because it's called a euro doesn't mean it has anything to do with the cabal. The belief is that's very much in place still. It won't be called the Nordic euro. There's been all kind of speculation as to what it's going to be called, but it doesn't really matter. I think the UK will retain the pound. The US will have to adopt a treasury dollar of some description. Now, this is what the whole argument came in about, where the Americans kind of threw their toys out the pram and stormed out the meeting, because they were essentially told, look, you have to have a gold-backed currency, and we know you have no gold, because the reality is Fort Knox has no gold. It's an illusion. All the gold disappeared a long time ago. So where the US got particularly angry about this was the fact they were told, well, if you're going to have a gold-backed currency, you and other nations who have no gold will have to lease gold from China. Of course, they weren't very happy about this. But that is exactly what they're going to have to do, because if they don't have a gold-backed currency, then the nation will slip into the third world. Now, quite how, of course, there's a price to pay for the US adopting this, and quite what the implication of that is a bit unclear at the moment. I would imagine China is not going to dominate nations, because China doesn't do that, but it will exert some influence, which probably won't be a bad thing in some senses, because the US has got a long way to go to clear up its financial system. I would imagine also they will exert a degree of influence over the UK, which is why the UK has been begging China for all this trade, why it's adopted all the currency swaps, and why it joined the AIIB, etc., etc. So that was a big development. So we will have gold. You may get silver-backed currencies. You may have other asset-backed currencies. But we are seeing the end of fiat currency, which has been the stronghold of the cabal virtually since its inception. That is disappearing, that is going. So we know we are not going to have the cabal anymore. And it may seem to some people to be an impossible dream to believe. But it is a reality. We come back, and I think it's a good point to raise this, and something that Lisa put on the blog when we talked about, everyone goes, who are these white hats? And everyone thinks they're kind of a loose group of people who aren't really working together. Well, the reality is people who are making the big changes in this world, nobody knows who they are. You wouldn't know their names. I'd call them ghosts who move in and out of situations and affect big change. They never will be known. They're not interested in being known. But they get on and do the job. And these people have been working for a long time to eradicate the problem of the Cabal to bring about a multipolar world, which we all desperately need to look to achieve, rather than having a US hegemony, which is what I call the unholy trinity of death, destruction, and grand larceny. This is all going. It's not a pipe dream. But the problem with all these empires, they take a long time to collapse. Like the old Soviet Empire, whatever we think of it, and whoever was responsible, that took an awful long time to collapse. But the Berlin Wall moment really signified the death and the end of it. We will have a Berlin Wall type moment when the Cabal's gone. But also, don't expect to see chemtrails disappear just because the Cabal are weak. They're not going to disappear. They'll be one of the last things to disappear. You're going to see huge economic change in the world. At some point, yes, chemtrails will disappear and go. But, someone said to me, there's an argument that says if they switch them off tomorrow, we'd have huge climate and ecological problems. I don't know whether that's true, but it's a possibility. So in all these situations, we have to be very careful how we go about dismantling the Cabal system. At one point, I was very, very concerned they may just floor everything, and we could have had huge catastrophe with no water, no power, no banks for a week, 2 weeks, a month, who knows. I'm less inclined to think that's going to happen now. I wouldn't be 100% sure, but I'm more confident that's less likely because there are these discussions going on behind the scenes. And I think the way, use Syria as an example, we are seeing a climb down, and we're seeing other climb downs across the world, but the Cabal is not exerting its influence the way it did. And it is, in a sense, backing down as much as you can say peacefully. I think that's as best as we can expect them to operate and behave, but we're certainly not seeing the kind of scorched earth approach which we may have envisaged could have happened previously.
Thank you for that, Paul. We've actually broken one of our own records. I know every time we have you on, we get contacts from other show hosts asking if we can put them in touch with you. But tonight, we actually got the first one within 7 minutes of the show starting. And amazingly, that's from Claire Kennedy, who was on with us last Friday. Is it only last Friday? Is it only a week ago?
Yeah, she was our last show on Per.
Yes.
Yeah, she was, wasn't she?
That's right. Wow, there's a lot happening this week.
Yeah, good luck getting a word in edgeways with her, Paul.
Well, careful, Claire's listening. You'll be on.
I know she is, and she knows I do mean it, but, in a nice way.
Yeah. Well,
I'm sure we can sort that out for definite. That'd be great. Look forward to it.
Claire's on Freedom Talk Radio, and she's also got a question for you. And she says, what does Paul think of the legal name fraud that is having huge success in the UK and the United States?
I think someone will have to fill me in on what that means. Sorry.
From what I understand, there's a group on Facebook called Surrender the Citizenship, and what people are doing is
there's a poster campaign, isn't there, about the legal name fraud?
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about, yeah? The poster campaign.
That's part of it, but what I've seen that Dave and Claire are doing is they're setting up their own trust and then collapsing the trust that was kind of set up without our consent by the birth certificate and taking over that trust, becoming the beneficiary rather than a trustee, I think.
Well, I mean, I know a little bit about this. I don't know a lot about it. I'm actually intrigued to hear what they have to say about that. I mean, yeah, I've heard about it and I've read a bit about it, but I can't say I'm that well informed. But anything that's a development. I think at the end of the day, this is about if we can take positive action, and it doesn't involve. Don't fight the Cabal. Don't fight the system. Just go and find what it is that is legally correct and make that system and solution work. That is the way to defeat them. I applaud people trying to take on the Cabal in the Cabal legal system and courts, but it's a very, very fraught exercise because you are always going to end up at some point having to deal with them in their own backyard, and it becomes very difficult. But where people can definitely make a big, big difference, even before the Cabal causes when you were able to go and find problems, well, and there are many within their system, to be able to legally challenge it and say, well, this is the alternative and this is what it should be. And if you can do that, I think you have far greater chance of success. And we are seeing those things where people are challenging it in this way and succeeding because they know legally what is correct and what isn't. And they're able to find a way forward of being able to challenge things in a way that means they can achieve tangible results rather than getting stuck and bogged down. Maybe it's a legal system, whatever aspect of the cabal it is, and you can spend years chasing your own tail and actually getting nowhere. So, I applaud that, and if Claire wants to obviously send me some stuff, I'll have a read about it because I'm always interested in broadening my education and understanding too.
That's fantastic, Paul. I've just got a message of Tony, our technical guru, and he said we're sounding absolutely dreadful, so we could do with a system reboot. So sorry about this, listeners. What I'm going to do is reboot my computer. Should be back on air in about a minute, and then if you refresh the site, you should get a new player up, and we'll carry on from there. Okay?
Sounds okay to me.
All right. We'll be back in a minute, guys.